14, Financial Corporate Elites, the New World Government. Um, this chapter was very eye opening for me when Amos Wilson pretty much talks about the fundamentals of private financial corporations and basically how their power controls a lot in the American society. And part of it is, or a big part of it, is just having the means of production, owning, the industry and things that create jobs that affect livelihood of people. And I thought it was a huge factor because I didn't know that within having the means of production, you know, not only you have the citizens pretty much looking at you, but you also have the government officials. And it really goes into play where having that financial power can really influence a lot of decision making,
Absolutely.
from the decisions when it comes to economics, making government decisions of who's being elected, who's going to run office. I mean, from head to toe, it's really deep. And I guess this chapter was more of a detailed version when we had the live stream of how our jobs created and why
Hmm.
it's very important for black people to have ownership in some sort of means of production. I'm curious though, what were you guys thinking when reading this chapter?
When he said they must co-own the mainstream American financial corporate sector, I was thinking about it as being, you know, operating in one or two ways. You'd either have to have like a massive influx of capital in the form of like localized banks and institutions, that would target the African American community, especially if you're if you're like looking at the other chapters in the book where he's talking about stuff like Susu and all that. I think
Mm-hmm.
he's talking about institution building to own that way.
Yeah.
And then and that's just the financial and corporate sector. Then I also think he's looking at it from the material perspective. Like if you're outside of the coast, or you're in the like more rural part of the coastal states, you see like North Washington State, for example, on the West Coast, you have the tech companies. You have law firms, accounting firms, consulting firms, those kind of things.
Mm.
But when you move toward the eastern part of the state, you see more of the foundational stuff that you need to run a society. So you see the ranchers, the wineries, the orchards, the apple growers, the
Yeah.
wheat producers. You see all the different things there that are like foundational to the operation of society, and also the industrial sector as well, um, that you don't necessarily see in the city. So I think he was looking at, in a way, black people developing ownership of those things, because those are the tangible hard parts of the society. Those really are the means of production. Food is critical.
Yeah.
Industry, heavy industry is critical. And then also the the more the part that pushes the paper around, the financial side too. So I just think he was trying to create, he was saying that we need to have institutions that give us representation in all
Hmm.
across all those sectors. But when I look at the history of the country, it just seems like that's been a mission for specifically African people to not have, you know. So I just don't know how he'd expect that to come around.
Yeah. I totally agree. And it was a great point that you mentioned how part of America has this industry that is built, and then on the east side you have, your essentials, necessities when it comes to food or
Yeah, your
wheat and
commodity
stuff.
stuff. Yeah.
Because I think in that chapter too, it talks about how America is, I guess, divided into like 12 districts, And I
Yeah, he's
think
talking about the Federal Reserve. Yeah.
right.
Oh, for the Federal Reserve, yeah.
Yeah, the
Right.
Federal Reserve. And so
Yeah.
I thought, man, like this is really planned out,
Hmm.
and
Oh yeah.
no wonder it's called private financial corporate complex. It's so detailed to where it's very it's very hard to understand. Like you really had to been a part of that upbringing or the startup of it to really get a grasp
Hmm.
of how this is all played out. And I think one of the things too that really took my attention is going back to again where these private financial corporations, with them being as the second government, it gives really the leeway for companies to just do whatever with its employees and not have the government, interrupt that or question that at all. Like recently, we just heard about Salesforce. Well, for me, I've heard about Salesforce laying off 10% of its coworkers, and that's like about 8,000 people, but still going to this day, they're doing layoffs. And
Yeah.
with the people that used to work there, you would think that they would have support to find another job, through the company or have a heads up. But it was just like a Thanos snap, just a snap of a finger, and bam, you get a letter and you have to just figure out from there.
That's it.
And being in a position where citizens are depending on these corporations, it's not a good feeling at all. It definitely isn't,
Yeah.
because you
And
don't, well, we pretty much know the agenda, but the average person does not know the agenda. They're just in this race and trying to survive. And that's the
yeah,
mode that they're going to
yeah,
remain in, you
yeah.
know?
And the other thing that I noticed in like reading the chapter, it was a short chapter, right? But in the first half of the chapter, he talks about the American hegemony, and how it
Yes.
creates the structure to minimize competition or de-incentivize competition, and
Yep.
to like essentially, have them be the moral authority and the police force for the world, not by being the literal police, like the book says. It says, but just by taking specific action against, specific interventions against specific actions that would threaten the interests of either the US directly or junior partners. Yeah, he explains all of that, right? And that's geopolitics. So he's talking about what's going on outside home. But
Hmm.
I just feel like he doesn't, and he does it in other areas of the book, but in this part, to just answer that question, I feel like a big miss is what the dynamics are in the country, that operate the exact same way. It's like you could draw the connection from geopolitics to local politics. Just for an example, this is when George Floyd happened a couple of years ago, right?
Right.
You had this article come out that said the choking technique that Derek Chauvin used on George Floyd was something that was practiced on Palestinians, and you had a bunch of these police officers from all over the country that went to Israel to get trained, or hired consultants from Israel to fly to the U.S. to these police departments to give them training on all these advanced, policing techniques.
Get out of
So
here.
you see right there, you see how geopolitics becomes local politics, just in the realm, the small, tiny realm of law enforcement. In that question, it's like he in the first half of the chapter he talks about what happens, globally, but we know the same dynamics play out
Yeah.
locally too, right? So
Yeah.
I feel like expecting black people to have, like, to organize in that way, knowing how, the law operates differently basis on color, I
Right.
just feel like it's a big ask. I feel like what he should be looking at would be more of, the way other communities do it, kind of like, Malcolm X said this too. If Africa's strong, everywhere else that's in the world that's black will be stronger. It'd be more of like these, organization coming in, just the alliance tilting away from the West in general could create more circumstances where you have greater capital control in the diaspora that could come in and influence the politics the same way you see, you know, interest groups for communities like Indians, Chinese, Middle Eastern people, you know, could influence the US to give them a preferred position. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like that's how it would work because internally, it's just like the mode of suppression has been pretty much perfected, and there's incentives even for people in the community to, you know, if you sprinkle some money on most people in the community, what happens? They disappear and they wind up somewhere else, right? Because they don't want to be in the community anymore. They don't invest in their own community. It's like there's incentives to not, to not produce for the top 20% of most talented, and in the middle they're the ones left behind, and they're still looking more outward too. Everybody's looking for the way out. Not really, people aren't really looking at the way in. It's just like the system incentivizes that thinking, you know.
Yeah. I mean,
So
we could
yeah,
even, because with the geopolitics, you can even see it with African countries. They're
exactly,
not looking within and trying to see how they themselves can make the country better, but
exactly.
looking outward towards
Mm-hmm.
America, the European
Mm-hmm.
system, and
Yep.
relying on that. And again, with having that influential power and be able to invest, manipulate, and pretty much implement their system into these
Mm-hmm.
countries,
Mm-hmm.
you take a lot of opportunities away from the people that are in there, and they're not going to benefit. It's pretty much just repeating a copy
Yep.
of capitalism and just this American government
Mhm.
within theirs,
Yeah.
and the cycle just repeats itself.
Really, just based on that, we kind of answer the question like number one, should we have a capitalist economy?
Hmm.
No, if you take the definition of capitalism as being this racialized system, then you don't want that, right? Because that's what you have in those other countries. You do have capitalism, right? And then you do have capitalism here. And essentially, capitalism incentivizes white supremacy, essentially. It incentive once you climb the ladder to a certain point, like it or not, you want to have a return on your investment, so you don't buy in the community. You buy your house outside where the property value is more likely to hold. It's like same thing, same thing globally, right? So we know that, should we have a capitalist economy? Probably not, because if the only one that you could have is one that's racially defined, it's just the way it is. Um, and
Yeah.
yeah, we do agree that the quality of life should be influenced by people, not corporations. But where do you get to that point if you aren't able to create localized corporations? You know what I mean? That would operate in your own people's interests. It's going to be seen as non-competitive, right?
Right. And then I think that's why in the solution on that last page, Amos Wilson is talking about, the organized, Africans that are consuming, having African people that are wealthy and that have these corporations, if they come together by their
Hmm.
own will to, develop a new economy and just a new way that would benefit its people, to be successful, to have these jobs, to
Yeah.
create an opportunity that is fair and
Hmm.
justifiable,
Hmm.
then we would be able to overcome and not have to be so reliant on this complexity here. And
Yep.
going this chapter also reminds me of when Hollop was talking about the art of legitimacy, where financial corporations have so much power, they don't have to intervene so much, and
Hmm.
especially within the public eye.
Yeah.
They could just do a little action here and pretty much have the faces, who are speaking to the public, handle the rest of the work and still just operate behind the scenes.
Yeah. And also, you have to realize, like, people don't think too, um, that like individual politics is usually really intimately connected to who pays your paycheck. You know,
Mm,
So if you work for like, and this is a real life example, I met someone who is from the Midwest. They work for Nestle,
mm-hmm,
and I was talking. It's like, this was like she was a black lady, and we were just happened to talk about all of the things Nestle was doing in Michigan with the water supply. You know,
Yeah.
The- so you had Flint and all that, but I was like, how do you feel about Nestle restricting use of water to produce bottled water, and you have just a few miles away a water crisis, and she just told me, I know where you're going with this, but at the end of the day, I can't really have an opinion that's against my own interests.
Mm,
And she was straight up about it.
Yeah.
She's like,
Yeah.
Nestle pays my paycheck, so I'm not gonna diss Nestle.
yeah.
Yeah.
I want Nestle to win because if Nestle wins, I win. So that's part of the problem, that we always have, as long as we cannot employ ourselves. You
That's
know,
true.
yeah,
Yeah. It's that old saying, never forget who cut the lights on.
or
And
not even that. Whoever pays the piper calls the tune.
there you go.
You know.
I mean, and then too, like that's another thing where when people are experiencing these layoffs or job cuts, and it's the employee themselves, you can't necessarily look at the manager or the supervisor and just say, oh, you guys handle this poorly, because they're the ones, that are just going by what's happening, and they want to keep their job.
Yep.
They don't want to be the next ones up. They want to
Nope.
support that agenda because, again, it's all about how can they survive, and and is this supporting my needs? Is this the quality of life that I want, to continue? And
Mm.
another thing that struck me with this chapter as well was when Amos Wilson was quoting an author, Parenti or Parenti,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Hmm.
where he talked,
Parenti.
yeah,
Yeah.
Parenti, when he
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
much summarizes how top positions from federal, state, party positions, again, are chosen by the elite, and less frequently they are chosen by elite colleges, foundations, and science establishments.
Yeah.
Again, just the amount of ownership that these people have gave me an example of how, controlling the narrative is such a big deal, because not only these folks control like the money and how it's generated and how it's distributed, but
Hmm.
again, also to like food. I
Hmm.
remember taking a class of eating healthy, and they were talking about how a lot of companies own 90% of the food distribution.
Hmm.
And how it's distributed is a lot of the food is processed, right? Where it's being manufactured in a factory. It's not healthy, it's not clean.
Yeah.
And we pretty much have little little resource to go somewhere that is organic, that is, properly farmed, and it doesn't have genetically modified organisms or, GMOs and things like that.
Yeah. And he also said that these systems, the corporate financial system is not democratic. The
Right.
Federal Reserve isn't democratic, but
But they
even a
cloak it
corporation
as
isn't.
that.
Yeah, even a corporation though isn't democratic, because if you ever own shares in a company, and you get that letter in the mail that has the annual appointment of leadership, everybody has a vote.
Right.
Um, you get vote. The number of votes you have is based on the number of shares you have. So if I have 10 shares and someone else has 1,000 shares, that person has 1,000 more votes, right? So that's not democratic right there. It's not one person, one vote.
Hmm.
But also, if you ever look at the actual ballots, it'll be like, for the new chairman, Bob Jones, and then there's nobody else to select from. So it doesn't matter whether you vote for him or not, he's getting in, you know?
Right. Right.
So,
Regardless.
They
so
manipulate it from the jump.
yeah, it's an anti-democratic system, and you could tell it's racially driven by by looking at boards in general, and looking at who chief executives are, and looking at the C-suite versus the people that actually do the work. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, it's just that just knowing just based on the like limited information people could just glean from their exposure in their daily lives, they should be able to see that this whole system is just it's just corrupt from soup to nuts, you know?
But people, how capitalism, um, how it's sold. You work hard, you move up in the world.
Mhm.
It's all in your hands. A lot of times, how it's sold
Yeah.
in this country,
Oh yeah,
especially.
yeah.
And so, since we're the center of the universe for capitalism, you know, everybody hears that message around the world. And I like what Amos Wilson has here when he describes capitalism. He says in capitalist societies, national and multinational corporate hegemons and their satellites markedly influence the quality, rhythms, order, and direction of people's lives, their
Mhm.
self perception, the nature of their social interactions, their values, tastes, and desires more directly than their governmental, cultural, and religious institutions. And that's so true. It's so true. I mean, we really see it. Uh, I'd say maybe the past 20 years, it just seems like it's a media frenzy around whatever the next big tech company is doing, or
Yeah.
what the next big CEO. The focus on the big two was Bezos and well, Bezos is retired, but still, to a
Right.
certain extent, and Musk. And it's like a whole stardom, celebrity um, focus, but it's also um, bearing out what he's saying, because they're huge, they're gigantic, and they do influence what happens to the ordinary person, the ordinary worker, more so than the government, in a lot of ways. It seems like, or they drive that.
Yeah.
Um,
And you have
and
to realize these guys, they're like really intimately related to like
hmm
tied to the military industrial complex. For
yes,
example,
yes,
Musk with his famous tweet about Bolivia, we can coup who we
yes,
like for Evo
yeah,
Morales, right? So
yep.
y- is knowing that this is a racially driven system, do you really feel like there could be a black automaker that gets, discount coltan, copper, and other minerals to make
Oh well,
cars
it gets
just
the contracts that he got.
exactly just the government contracts he got, and the fact
Yeah.
that if you look at it, you have the SEC, you have business, not the Better Business Bureaus, but you have like government agencies that are involved in making sure that businesses actually do produce the products they say they will. But if you look at it, Musk has promised a lot of things. Most famously, he promised the sealed magnetic tube, like the 360-degree maglev hyperloop that
Oh,
never
right,
came around, right?
Mhm.
right.
But he bored the tunnel in LA, and it went from being the hyperloop to being a train that would run Teslas. You just drive down, and I don't know how that's going to be time efficient. Drive down, your Tesla gets on a platform, and it's like shot down the trainway to the next stop on the station. Then you drive out and get back on the road to avoid traffic. It went from that to just being a pedestrian subway to then being absolutely nothing, you know.
Hmm.
Wow.
But no, in any other rational society or like country with a business environment that has integrity, it would have been like,
Wouldn't
hey, you
allow
didn't
that.
build what you said you were going to build.
Right.
We gave
That's
you money
right.
for that. Money needs to come back, right? But
That's right.
it's almost like even the company itself doesn't produce that many cars. The cars it produces aren't high quality, and it doesn't really. And we already know now that those kind of cars aren't environmentally friendly because you have the physics of displacement. So what you're doing is front loading all the carbon, all the chemicals and stuff to produce the battery, and then the car will run cleaner. But A, it still costs electricity to use, and B, it takes an
Do
immense
that.
amount of energy and toxic materials to produce the car. So it's not greener than anything.
Yeah.
And its lifespan is so short that it's not likely that it's going to last long. It's not going to be on the road long enough to offset the carbon that was used to create it. So it's just going to be dirtier than a normal car at the end of the day. But
But every now and
even
then you get that analysis. You don't really get that analysis in let's say, in the mainstream, and there's nobody really stopping, these gigantic moguls from continuing to fail and get bailed out. There's nobody stopping that.
Yeah. Helena, you made a good point when there is a CEO that is pretty much in the spotlight of what they're doing. Everyone else
Mhm.
follows because it creates it's a trend, and the trend being of what can what can support the agenda the most, what can create corporate wealth, because at the end of the day it's all about them serving themselves.
Yeah,
It was never about the people. And so
so
if
true.
this if Bezos has a way to make e-commerce a thing and generate all this revenue, then you're going to have others that are trying to create that and make a replica. Or if
Mhm.
Salesforce is the so-called CRM, then you're going to have it just gives birth to other CRM companies, HubSpot,
Mhm.
Zendesk, and things like that. Mm.
I mean, I know we can't turn back
Right,
time, obviously, but reading this in the 90s and me remembering the 90s and just thinking if our folks had gotten on the ball then, we would have a real fighting chance. I'm not saying that all is lost. I'm definitely
right,
not saying that.
right.
But I'm saying we would be way ahead of the game if we had gotten the start back then. Because things now, I mean, you're talking about billionaires like it just rolls off the tongue. Oh, there's a billionaire here, a billionaire there. It wasn't like that then. Saying
Yeah,
billionaire meant was really a big deal.
Billionaires, but I think that's kind of like people that look at that. It's kind of like I think it's not true because even though the economy now is more robust and diversified than it was back then, you still had the same limitations on black folks. So in order to make, like they say, in order to make money, you have to have it. And relatively speaking, now, with even in a more diversified economy, the position of the people relative to this top is still the same. The rates of marginalization is still the same. Um, it's just a few. What's happened is that just the top 20% has more places to put their money, and capital could flow more freely. That's what you're seeing. But for the typical person, it's not really different because you could argue that now we know everything we know now, then the next generation should be getting that same bump that we're getting, but instead you're seeing that the same things like trajectory for black wealth is going to go critical by 2050, right? It's going to be like zero. So if that's really true, that perspective isn't, I don't think it's the right one. I think what the right one would be is that back in the 90s, the US was, the Soviet Union fell. The U.S. was at its peak in terms of power and influence, and financialization had already begun, and nothing new was being produced then. It was just a refined method of extraction. 30 years later, you have the internet that's come along. It seems like the methods of extraction are becoming essentially perfected, and
mm,
so instead of like just this is just like another example of regular labor as like a taxi driver can't make money with his medallion's worthless because the mode of extraction through a rideshare app has become so perfected that you actually drive your own car into the ground and you give up all its value and you have nothing to show for it. You pay for the repairs, you pay for the insurance, you take all the risk, and they get a 30% cut or more of every single ride you get. So the method of extraction has been perfected, right? And you
mm.
have less to take away from it. That's what we're living in now. Financialization has run its course. Now it's like the perfection of extraction. So even if you make more in terms of your numerical dollars for adjusted for inflation, you make less. So what we really need to be doing is looking at ways to like divest from the system, I think, you know.
That's what I'm talking. I wasn't focusing so much on making making as much or more money back then. My the way I was thinking about it was how we would go about operating more of as a collective,
Yeah.
um,
Mhm.
Yeah.
doing things much more so in lockstep. I mean, more of us together
Right.
Mhm.
and where we were, and I think we would be definitely further along because we've lost the land ownership has gone down, not just wages, but land ownership.
Yeah.
We're the gentrification is, I mean, it's set in
Mhm.
so many different places. There is a chance to do some things. Obviously, again, like I said, we can't go backwards,
Right.
can't go back in time. But just when I'm thinking about it, just analyzing, okay, this is where we were at that point. Here we are now. How can we move forward? And it's just me in my feelings a little bit initially looking back at the 90s, like, oh my goodness, there what
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you see this and
Mm-hmm.
how he outlines our situation at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like if we just got grinding on some things, like with nationhood, there are some things that could have been done. Again, not 100% the solution because our communities, no matter what country, and we're focused on.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
there's always somebody doing some kind of uh, engineering or something to affect our community to
Yep.
pull out as much, you say, extract as much wealth as possible from everybody. But
Yeah.
specifically us, we seem to be target number one, no matter what.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
my
Because
the
we.
way I'm thinking about it is that just, in the 90s just could have gotten a lot more going. Now we're even more confused. People are calling themselves all kinds of different things, but African.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are definitely, things that have gotten
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah. And if you look at it now, like I said, right, we know, like now, I don't know how what the age of everybody is here, but I'm assuming that 20, 30 years ago, we were like young children, right? Our parents were had that same were essentially where we are now, and they were strapped. So even if they knew the path forward, they were capitally starved. Now, just for inflation, our generation is more capitally starved than our previous generation was. So even though we know what we know, our only it's like for us to collective to come together and do stuff on a collective scale, it's going to be even more difficult because on this soil because the funds are
Hmm.
already tighter, and look what just inflation over the past 2 3 years. Look at gas, look at food. People haven't seen this stuff since before our parents were in their prime, since
Mm-hmm.
the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like no, we know. It's just I just feel like the way forward is like an organized divestment,
Hmm.
or organized like reinvestment in places where you can develop and get return on your investment. Because if you buy hair too, the returns are getting lower and lower because the perfection in terms of extraction has been so refined that if you buy a stock hair, everybody made money on the IPO. You know, so by the time it comes to you, your margin is way less than the return on investment of those original angel investors, right? So
Yeah.
it's just like this. I think the system's just like hit its limit in so many areas that the only way to like move ahead is to like is to operate outside it. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Definitely does. Now I understand because Jabari had mentioned before of black owned businesses, right? Because
Hmm.
there's this thing when when some people have a black owned business, they're talking about creating generational wealth and
Hmm.
buy black. But Jabari made a great point of, that's not enough. Like having that
Hmm.
business is good and all, but you're just still a middleman. And I think this chapter really explains that because again, what your money is going towards to, what you have to pay and with um in terms of infrastructure, if you're leasing it, if you have to keep the building stable and things like that, and really having loans, it's all coming again from white institutions. It's not coming
Yep.
from our own people where we
Yep.
have our own financial institutions that
Yeah.
we could support and the money's like circulating in a certain
Hmm.
flow. The free market
Yeah.
philosophy that they're going with this, taking it globally. I mean, this is a huge deal where they are, like you said, Winsfield, you have Israel police coming over, teaching them tactics.
Yep.
But then also on top of that, they're having this peace and prosperity to pretty much deteriorate or prevent violence within other countries, trying to keep the peace. So at the same time, they're building their military, America, and also financial power so that when the time comes, no one can resist that or there wouldn't be as much resistance.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it makes a lot of sense now why a lot of money is not only being invested in towards the technology, but also towards the military. It's like, oh man, this is a bigger agenda that they're going for. They're trying to be a superpower, the
yeah,
only
yeah,
superpower.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what they're trying to do now. It's like if you look at what's going on, right, in terms of the forced, this like the Ukrainian and Russian conflict,
Hmm.
you have the U.S., which is the is like the fading but still somewhat present superpower, and it's like the leader of the mafia, right? And then you have all the little capos and little sub dons under him. You have Britain, France, Germany, NATO. It's
Hmm.
just this NATO countries.
Yeah.
Um, and you could tell it's a bit of a gangster thing going on because when somebody realizes that, oh, maybe this isn't going to work out and go the way they say, we're having austerity here, our gas prices are at like 50-year highs here, and we pay for more for gas and food than you guys from jump, so we're paying even more. It's like becoming unsustainable. Government leaders are saying this winter you're going to have to choose if you want to heat or you want to eat, you know then you have a country like Germany that says, "Oh yeah, maybe we need to like get to the negotiating table," And then as soon as they say that, what happens a month later? Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 get blown up. So in other words, it's like you ain't going anywhere. You're
Wow.
staying with us. It's that you can just see the mafia tactics that they employ to keep the group together.
Yep. And
Yeah,
from
because and you guys are familiar with Nord Stream 1 and 2, right?
Nord Stream, that's new to me.
Okay, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 were the Nord Stream 1, they're both gas pipelines that were pumping gas from Russia to Germany.
Okay.
Nord Stream 1 has been around for a while. Nord Stream 2 was just completed being built and was going to come online. Um, and essentially 45% of Germany's industrial output is powered by cheap Russian gas that's running through a pipeline. So the Germans wanted to go back and and essentially not keep funding the Ukrainian war. They want to sit at the table and bring an end to it.
Yeah.
But the US feels like it wants to go for broke because they feel like with all of NATO behind them, they feel like they could win. So when Russia was showing a little bit of Germany was showing a little bit of weakness, like let's not keep this thing going, because they have a pipeline where they can get the cheap gas, and they're facing these record high energy prices. The U.S. was like, nah, you can't do that, So just to make sure you don't try and weasel your way out, they will blow up the pipelines, you know.
Dang.
So that's essentially what happened. Sweden did an investigation and said, yeah, it was definitely U.S. did it, and the president always has plausible deniability, but yeah, that's how they keep, you know, there's like always a war going on. Like a lot of black folks see it as it's just the white people. They see the white superstructure as being like a homogenous monolith, but really it isn't. It's like it's a senior partner or a couple senior partners and a bunch of junior partners, always keeping each other in check to see who gets to call the shots. You know.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and that's like a clear example of how all these policies and how the capitalist machine is intimately related with the politics and how they create certain economic outcomes. You know,
May
so
the
now
best
the U.S.
ideology win.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like now the U.S. can say to Germany, now that there's no more pipeline, then you'll have to buy our frack gas. Shit sent over on tankers can be super expensive, but what other options do you have unless you can get it from the continent or somewhere else, But
Hmm.
they've cut off a relationship that was bringing peace in Europe just so that way they could keep exerting their influence over all of Europe except Russia, and ultimately Russia if they really feel they could win.
Again, the organized violence, right?
Hmm.
Exactly.
Not too much, not too little, but just enough to get the attention and send the message across.
But like that example I gave you, that's exactly how it works in the first half of the chapter when he's talking about how the U.S. you know deals with dissent, de-incentivizes people trying to other nations trying to
Yeah.
create
That's
autonomous blocks together.
defense strategy.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's the same that's the clean example, playing out right now of how they maintain hegemony.
Because, like you said, preventing the risk again of building relationships
Hmm.
without the U.S. really knowing about it or trying to do it secretly, and
Hmm.
to develop some kind of chance of overthrowing what is going on. And
Yeah.
they got to nip that in the bud in
Yeah.
order
Oh, yeah.
to keep the
Yeah.
agenda going.
And have other nations rely on that one superpower.
They can't really do it anymore, because if you look,
Right.
it's like who holds most of the U.S. debt? You know, the same country that they're competing against.
China.
Exactly. Who has the world's fastest supercomputers? The same country that they're competing against. You know, who is Russia selling the oil to now that they can't sell it to Germany, the same
Hmm.
country that they're competing against? And that's keeping the Russian economy afloat to keep fighting the war because they know in their, they know it's in their vested interest that Russia wins. And not only that, it's that whole BRICS alliance, right? So what they were trying to prevent in the top of the chapter is inevitably happening. Other countries are coming together to create associations
Right.
and economic alliances to offset the U.S. hegemon because it doesn't work for the global South, right?
They're
Mm,
trying, and the U.S. is trying to combat that.
Exactly, and it's
Yeah.
obvious that it's not going to work. Yeah, yeah, and I'm
Go
saying
ahead
they're
with it.
doing. It's like it's obvious it's not going to work, but it's not stopping them from trying to do it
Right.
anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think something that wasn't accounted for maybe on the U.S. side is just the amount of flat out greed. The
yep.
reason China got such a hold in this country was, I believe it was Walmart, deal with Walmart and the cheap goods that
Yeah,
everybody's
of
addicted
course.
to.
It goes back to GM in the like 70s and 80s, starting to
It's
outsource
amazing.
the labor, and yeah, that was to increase profits and to screw
Yeah,
over the American worker. But
it's
they've magically said,
completely
bring your. They said yes, send your work over. But once they sent all the work over, what they said was, well, I want every single person that's working here to know how every single machine works and be able to tear it down and put it
hmm
together so that way we could ultimately create our own factories to make our own cars. And they're doing that and they're competing against the US. And, they're in Asia already. So
hmm
they're competing in Asia. So you're seeing that, they built their own heavy industry. They, they're competitors. They didn't just sit there and say, "Oh, we're going to be doing this and being a source of cheap labor forever." They
right.
decided to,
Right.
build an industry and build an economy that could stand, that could compete toe to toe. And
They actually thought about the future.
yeah,
And my thing is that, and the reason I would talk about the incredible greed is because it's like, let me get as much as I can every step of the way. And
hmm
even and say, okay, if you just stop for a second and look, you're undercutting your future. You really
Mhm.
are. You're pulling everything out of this country, basically handing it on a platter to another country, the production.
yeah,
And then
but
when there's a hiccup, a little bit of a bump, you see what the oh my goodness, I have to rely on an entire other country
yep.
uh for supplies.
Just so you don't have to pay their workers. And that's
Right.
and in the beginning it started out as just them wanting to like screw over black workers, right?
Right. Yep.
But then
Yep.
it
Mhm.
became a thing where they're like, all workers, don't matter what
Yep.
color you are, we want profits to be higher. So, when it went beyond black people being like, lost hide and being the first fired, it then spread on the contagion, then spread onto all of the workers. The white workers
Everybody.
didn't care about them
That's
too.
right.
So you had the steel belt became the rust belt. Yeah, everybody knows. So
Oh yeah. What's the saying? The
these
canary
empires
and the
always end up cannibalizing themselves.
yes. I said, but if really if Americans paid attention to what happens to black folks, we've always, I think, almost always been on the
Yeah,
of
because we
front
look
lines of when
compared.
something happens. They
Yep.
say, "Oh, this is coming our way if we don't stop it." But
Hmm.
nope,
No.
don't do it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Don't do it. And yeah, that incredible greed, just constant. Every little bit. Is there another penny in your pocket? I'm going to do everything I can to take it and
Yeah.
tear up this country. I'm not even thinking about that. I just want that money in my pocket.
Yep. Yep.
And I mean, and for me, that's the way it is now, especially just the incredible amount of greed is why we need to, you know, push it as far as getting our stuff together and looking out for our people.
That greed kind of reminds me of Michael Jordan's Last Dance, where he would play blackjack with Scottie Pippen, Ron Harper, and like they're betting like hundreds and thousands of dollars, playing blackjack, and the bench players are just playing over like $5, and Jordan, he wants to play with them, and he's like, "Why do you want to play with us? We're only playing with $5." He was like, "I want to play because I want to be able to say I have your money in my pocket,
Hmm.
no matter
Hmm.
how small it is."
Hmm.
And that obsession, you could just relate that with America, just taking every single little bit from its citizens and just not giving a care in the world
Yeah,
because it's all
it just
about their interests.
and with ease, right? Um, give money away to. I mean, when we were talking when you all were mentioning with Russia and Germany
Hmm.
specifically, but with the whole situation with Ukraine and just the amount of money. And I said, whatever you believe about whether folks there should be supported by the U.S. at all, or some, or a lot. You got to kind of pause and think about the ease with which there's money committed by this country
Yeah.
to another nation, and there's not even an eye blink when that happens. But anything, any little thing like the student debt relief, how there's certain interests in this country that just lost their minds and still trying to block. And we're talking about $10,000 per person. And look at the billions without even, and what is it, like a third round of billions of dollars, or maybe fourth round at this point that's going to be shifted over. I mean, I don't know what it's going to take for folks to wake up, but my focus is our people. It's like,
Yeah.
and I hear some, our folks saying like, look how easy. It's like, okay, we, you've got to relate that somehow to our situation
Yeah.
and saying whatever little bit of money we're giving to the government is flying overseas.
Yeah.
Clearly, we're involved, unfortunately, not by choice
Right.
Yeah.
with that. So you can make a choice and say, okay, we're going to start charting our own path and not be tied to what happens with the government here or with the special interests here.
Yeah, it's like a matter of identity, though, right? Because that's the big hustle. You
Hmm.
touched on the point a few, like earlier on today. You got black folk that are telling you now they're not Africans.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah.
You know? I've been having this debate with somebody. It's been a pretty principled conversation
Hmm.
for the past couple of weeks um, over essentially what we live under, which is pan Europeanism. You know, the Berlin Conference was pan Europeanism.
Right.
They decided,
Right.
we're gonna secure our peace for the next couple centuries by exporting our violence on all the people that aren't in the club. You know,
Hmm.
but you come and you people come here involuntarily and they are subjugated perpetually, yet they still want to say things like, I have more in common with white people than I do Africans, and I'm not African,
It's
and all this
amazing.
stuff, you know?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I've been having this discussion accounting for like, why is it that, your politics says all these things clearly? How could you still consider yourself like black if you're not African? Like, well,
Hmm.
how are you partitioning the two? It's just about how does it make sense?
Right.
And why is it you can't find fraternity and common purpose with black people that you know aren't born in the US?
Right. Right.
Yeah, and it's just been it's just been a long trail of I explain one thing, they give me a counterpoint. The
Hmm.
counterpoint's really weak. I knock the counterpoint down, yet they want to like still keep going down that path. So they give me
Yep.
another counterpoint, and I knock it down, and then so you know, yeah, that's where I'm at. So I just feel like part of the issue, or maybe the core of the issue for like the black people having advancement, is the 90% that are apathetic, and then the 1% that are on the lunatic fringe.
Mm.
Yeah. 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 Oh
Because
yeah.
both of them are gonna be like the both like the 90% that's apathetic has the latent, you know, psychological profile of the lunatic fringe. The lunatic
Mm,
fringe is the most vocal, right?
mm,
So the 90% that are apathetic are either unknowing or afraid of the outside world, and unable to, and because of that, unable to leverage the potential of being, thinking more globally, right?
Yeah.
Then the lunatic fringe is gonna say, double down, there's no
mhm.
daddy better than my daddy, even if he tries to screw me every day,
Yeah.
and that's what he does. And then you have the 9% that usually the more brighter, more exposed. It's like they have to do the heavy lifting for like 11 times. They have to pull 11 times the weight, and it's just not possible.
Right. And that causes
I
them
th-
to give up at some point too.
Yeah, that
well, I
causes
was
that.
just going to say, I think a part of the apathetic folks are they get to that point because they've given up, and
Yeah,
I
some.
think they aren't on the lunatic friend side of it. They're just
Hmm.
defeated,
Mm.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
and really they just I don't see anything else but where we are, and we just got to go along. I don't see how we can do anything type of thing, and I've
yeah,
definitely
yeah.
I've seen and heard folks like that.
Yeah, because I was so like one of the topics we covered this past week was about bilateral relations. You know, like how can the U.S. can get all of its resources at a discount, but they don't benefit you. And if you work for them, you're an employee. You have nothing. They own
Mm,
everything, so
mm,
you can't pass the job on to your kids. So you're painted into a corner all the way. Why not try to back channel your way into these other places and help them develop to the point where they could cut those ties, or at least help them demand better terms, so that way you could benefit. You could have a relationship. Why is it that commerce, since you're from, you're part of that family, even just by legacy, why doesn't it go through you first, so you can have a better control over
Mm.
what's done with those resources, since you have your citizenship? And it's just like, you talk to people about these concepts and they look at you like you have three heads.
mhm, mhm,
So it's just like, okay, leave it all for them. But if you leave it all for them, then I say, what value is your citizenship if it's racialized? You know what I mean?
mhm.
And
If you're a second class citizen, what value is the passport? What value is the citizenship if it's not serving you the same way it's serving everybody else, right?
right. And
So,
go ahead.
yeah, so why not have other citizens, or try to accrue other citizenships, so that way you could leverage those and help those, and to help those people and help yourself as one of those people have better living terms. And they're just like, they feel like it's somehow, the cognitive dissonance feels like they're somehow betraying themselves. But I'm like, how can you be betraying yourself if what you have already doesn't serve you? You're actually protecting your own interests, which is, the first law of nature, But like I said, people just don't, it's hard for them to like see it that way.
Yeah.
This is a consequence of bending the knee.
Well, centuries at this
Yeah,
point, but
exactly.
especially the past, this is the 20th century on, just hammering that you basically, this is the best place. Now you're quote unquote free from slavery. This is the best place. You can't do it anyplace else. You get, when there's an uprising, there's some trouble, some good trouble.
Right.
Um, there's some little niblets here fed to the people,
Yep.
just enough to, for some uh uh some comfort, a little bit of comfort, and that's it
Yeah, they quiet you
until
down
the
for
next time.
yeah, and it's like they quiet you down a little bit with some
Yeah,
minor concessions, and then the minute that before the ink is even dry, it's back to the regular program.
that's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
it's weird. It's like I said, we've been having this conversation for probably about a month now, and I'm like, if you look at the civil rights legislation, education that went from being a public thing to a private thing. That's how they loopholed their way around it. So now it's more divided now and segregated now than it was in 1955, right?
Hmm.
Instead of the letter of the law being used to regulate housing, it went to the banks, and now, you know, home ownership, income disparities, and even those famous examples of people that get the appraisal on their house doubled when a white person's doing the guided tour. You know, it's like it's really naked now, right? So fair housing is a joke, right?
Hmm.
Gentrification is an example of that too.
Oh
It's
yeah.
like, you know, even for the white women, abortions federally, you know, overturned, right? It's like
Hmm.
everything that was conceded is essentially
Taken
being
back.
reversed. And so they're turning the clock backwards, you know, because
Right.
they want the good old days
Oh, right. Right.
to hedge off the demographic shift. And you say this to these folks, like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? These are running. This is this is the letter of the law. You know, this is the man telling you your interests don't matter. Are you still allied with that dude? And they'll be like, hell yeah, you know.
Yep.
It's
Yeah.
just like if other people get billions of dollars in legislation, you get like a really
A
misguided.
holiday that everybody
Yeah,
gets.
you get a misguided holiday that
Yeah.
everybody, and then that's the win. You know, it's just
You
like
think that's winning?
yeah. But the only thing they have to talk about is never stuff that's like kitchen table or back pocket, you know, or front pocket issues. It's always they're always using the vehicle of the pop culture moments. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
To
Hmm.
like distract people and let them feel like, oh, we're fighting for you. But it's like, you know, oh, Coach Prime's a sellout. I'm like, I don't care about Coach Prime. Coach Prime's like my
Right.
mother else. You know,
Right.
he's an employee. He's it's like he doesn't. It's like you just see. I just feel like these guys are just like misleaders. You know,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh definitely.
and they
The
just
whole
got yeah
the discussions again in the mainstream are not, they
yeah
don't really get to the root. It's usually now it's more so of holding hands with another group, and our problems are their problems and their problems are our problems, but we'll focus on their problems for the most part when it comes to solutions or getting
yeah.
money. Then they get money, then it's we be quiet again for a little bit, get upset, start getting agitated. Oh, we're
Mhm.
holding hands again. Their problems are our problems are their problems. Somebody else gets a bill,
Yeah,
and
other
they're
communities
good to go.
their own supermarkets, their own
Hmm.
chambers of commerce, their own import export companies, and they can consume what comes from the mother country or resell it, and it's all good. People could feed each other, but the minute your group tries to feed each other, you get upset. Like you know, it's like you don't want to patronize it, or it's so it's like the psycho. It's like Wilson talks about it earlier in the book too. Psychology is broken, right?
Mm.
Hmm.
So that's pretty much the barrier to even just having everything in question three happen because people wouldn't want to put their money in the bank if it was a black bank, you know? They'd be worried. So it's just like not realizing that the stability of the bank is based on the black person standing next to you, you know? So, but it'd be like, oh, the other bank's ice must be colder or the other bank's more stable. When really we're seeing right now with the inflation and everything that there's no stability anywhere in the system, you know? And there's no stability in the employment, so there can't be any stability in the finances. So, but people
Right.
just don't. They're not really. You know, it's just hard to get their minds to change. You know, to see things for what they are, and then they could act accordingly. It's just an uphill struggle.
Yeah. I mean, again, like this will be the consequence for, black people who want to stay here and support the American agenda, or just saying that they can do it right here. This will be the consequence of bending the knee. You're
Hmm.
supporting the American interests without even knowing it.
Hmm.
And over time, you'll notice that less and less you're valued.
And
Is
it's like also, I feel like by them identifying so nakedly with the guy, it's just like I don't know if you guys heard about this. It might, if it comes rings a bell. Let me know that LaDavid Johnson. Do you remember that?
Ladera.
Oh,
Yep,
the who was part of the four in was it Chad?
yep, in
They,
Chad, and then
yes,
he went to go kill some Africans to get some uranium, and got
Oh
killed.
wow.
that's right.
And
Yeah, yeah.
then when it came time to like place the call to his family, they didn't even remember what his name was, you know. So that's what I'm saying. It's just
Wow.
like do people really don't they realize that? I feel like they're actually gonna support the continued exploitation of other black people because they are over identifying with somebody that doesn't identify with them. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Mm,
Hmm.
Yeah, I feel like that's the hostility, and you could kind of see it in the rhetoric. Like, we're not Africans, they're not us. The tether talk, or the all the other things that
yeah.
it's like it's like a form of self hate, but they don't see it
Yes,
that way because they don't see the people they
yes,
hate as being the same as them.
yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
It definitely is a form of self hate.
yeah. But they don't see it that way because
That's right. That's
yeah.
right. Exactly right.
And to square the circle of somebody else being able to come over here with their capital interests and have the same citizenship. You could buy U.S. citizenship if you invest more than like $2 million something. They give you a passport. So just to know that you could have you can get investor visa and investor passport. That's how it works. You get an investor visa, you come over here for a certain period of time, your money sits in the banks, you can get invested, you get the passport, so you become a citizen. So just the definition of citizenship being something that's like economically driven, from the outside in,
yeah.
and that person comes over and has all the rights is same as you.
Yeah.
Hmm.
They create the idea that you can only be in the club if you were enslaved here, as if slavery only happened here. So
Right.
it's just like, yeah, the more you not pick the points apart, and then it's just really hard. You you reach a point where it's just gonna be like you're talking to a kid, and you're gonna be like, well, you've disproven all the points. Are you still gonna do that? And they're gonna go, yes, and then you're gonna say, why? Because I said so. It's just like that's where you're at. It's just we have to get we have to get over that hump, I think, and
Yeah.
then people could move in some kind of lockstep. You know what I mean?
You mentioned that we have to pretty much divest and just it has to be from outside of America. What
Hmm.
would you say to the what would you say to our people that is in Africa and their government may seem corrupt and they're not having the same as opportunities and they're trying to come here to learn, develop some kind of skill or generate some kind of money in order to move back and possibly build a business. Like what are your thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
Well, when I look at it that way, it's the same. It's like, I feel like they have the same problem,
Mhm.
because they have the solutions. The solution is in the person standing next to them, but they're not willing to do what's necessary. It's like when you read I'm sure everybody here knows about the Walter Rodney book. If you read that book, you realize that if the problem there is that they need to really confront those people. They need to confront that class of people,
Mhm.
because
Hmm.
they're operating against everybody's interests. And the reason why it would be different there and easier to do it is because they're all the same people, right?
Right.
So you should expect differently. You could expect more from your own people than you do from somebody else. That's why I feel like here
Hmm.
it's very really really obvious to see that that person's not he doesn't see you as you're not his people, and he's
Right.
constantly reminding you.
Right.
So it should be very easy for you to just look inward and just be like, okay, then we'll figure it out. But it's catch as catch can, and if that means outside investment, then you know of energy and capital, then that's what we'll do. you know and like try to bond with those coming from those places, give them the game so that way they could influence this place, because they actually do have the capital. They have the resources that are coming in at 19, like a 80% discount. So um they have influence,
Right.
so it would just be about coming together and just realizing that, and then applying the pressure properly, them applying it internally at home, and people here applying it externally by just divesting, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's hard to do that when everybody is divided against everybody, you know?
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've covered this chapter enough. This was great. Great
Yeah,
discussion.
you
E-
packed a lot in there.
Oh yeah, we sure did.
You did.
Got some good content. But next week we have chapter 14, race and economics. I am looking forward to that. Yeah, great talk, guys.
Wow.
This was great. This definitely
Yes,
was.
it was good. Thank you both. Very engaging. Enjoyed it.
Nice.
Until
Yeah.
next time.